The Callisto Protocol has released, but maybe it shouldn't have released. Now, that's not me trying to dunk in the game, it is that it did unfortunately experience some pretty severe day one issues that absolutely put a bit of a damper on things for some people on some platforms. If you have a PS5, you had a pretty damn good time with it. But I think more relevant to this broader discussion is, well, let's just take a look at this. Striking Distance Studios were founded mid-2019. Here's a post that I just saw on their Glassdoor. By the way, their Glassdoor is a 4.2 out of 5, which, even considering they had a pretty substantial crunch, I'd say is pretty good going. It's only 17 reviews, but still, I think it's worth bearing that in mind. But yes, they just passed their 1 year anniversary, growing to over 100 people as of the 13th of July 2020. Remember that they are a company owned by Krafton, and Krafton are the overall group that, of course, includes the like of PUBG Corp. Now, what was quite interesting is that this game originally, as you can see here, was supposed to be set in the PUBG universe, but later on they decided, okay, no, how about we get the Dead Space guys to make their own IP? That would make sense. And yes, I would agree with that logic. So this is not some purely self-published game by them. Evidently, they do have the larger company to appease, and I think this is going to become extremely relevant, even when we get into the specific criticisms that have been leveled at this game as a game. But to go into the issues, look, basically it's humongous stuttering on PC day one, a few hours after this came out. I looked at Steam, it was mostly negative. Now, right now, as of the time of recording, it's up to 58% on Steam, which certainly is better because they did get on quite a few of those problems pretty rapidly. I will say, though, it also has like 15,000 odd reviews in Steam. The common wisdom used to be about 63 sales per review on Steam, so it's probably decent enough day one sales considering everything else, and that I think this will be quite a big seller on the consoles. What is interesting, though, is that because of all of this, the publisher Krafton stock actually did take a little bit of a tumble. Went down 8.41% on the Seoul Stock Exchange. Now, of course, often after those bumps down, there will be bumps up, there will be corrections up, but it's just potentially noteworthy that the stock had a little bit of a response to this game's launch. What's going on? Well, on performance, basically, PC, humongous stuttering, big issues, very bad launch. Xbox, there have been issues. PS5, yep, that just feels like the proper, intended, good experience. And to jump basically into what Digital Foundry found whenever they did their own deep dive, they do incredible work. Basically, it's an Unreal 4 engine title that does not pre-compile its shaders, and that essentially means that whenever there is the first appearance of something within you playing a level, bam, shaders have to compile, and that will just result in a very hefty stutter. And this is even a problem with the 12900K and a 4090, right? So yeah, this is going to be very much a problem. It also seems to be limited by single core CPU speeds. Not ideal, right? Probably some more room for optimization there. And overall, that's basically the story, right? It's not really a thing where you're throwing more horsepower at the problem. The problem is actually how the piece of software is running. Over on Xbox then, well, the performance mode runs equivalently to the PS5. The quality mode does not, with severe frame rate issues and a whole bunch of other things. So, remember the whole Gotham Knights thing, right? Where basically they said that there would not be a performance mode on the consoles because in a way, they kind of just had to constrict the whole thing to what would make sense on a Series S, right? And at least people knew in advance, so customers could make that choice. Whoever was involved in marketing this game about the same time did try to turn that developer's loss into a bit of a win for themselves by tweeting, "We'd love to inform you that we'll be shipping globally December 2nd, and yes, we'll have a 60 FPS performance mode." Using this bit of marketing is a bit awkward because they don't actually have a 60 FPS performance mode on the Series S, which, to be honest, I don't really blame them. It's a Series S. What do you expect? Again, that's people running a Twitter account. They may not even be fully up to date with day-to-day game development operations. It is often like that at large companies, and that's something that is often very underappreciated by audiences at large. So yeah, it doesn't have a performance mode or a quality mode, it just turns in a solid 30 FPS experience. you know what? Fair enough. That's what I'd expect for that console. Just be a bit more careful with your marketing. Next, then, apparently a bunch of this was just an error where Glenn Schofield, who is, of course, heading up this studio and was, I forget his exact title, but basically lead in Dead Space. He said, being fixed, a wrong file was patched, any minute, just freaking error by someone rushing. Yep, problems between the, the brain and the keyboard, those can happen, right? It is reality. I'm sure anyone who's worked in software has ended up in some sort of Git-related nightmare before. So shit like this happens. They did actually have a day one patch ready, which did alleviate plenty of things. That came out on the 2nd. There was again patching over the weekend that fixed the worst of the PC stuttering problems. So I guess maybe recompiling those shaders, who the hell knows? I mean, often it is the case where, like, if one thing's a little bit wrong or one file's out of date and the system isn't running, but equally it's not, like, completely causing the thing to lock, yeah, your game will run, the fix just will not be working. Unfortunate mistake. Now, what's kind of doubly unfortunate here for Glenn, and where I think I start to really understand issues with the game, is this tweet. I only talk about the game during an event. We are working 6 to 7 days a week. No one's forcing us. Exhaustion, tired, COVID, but we're working. Bugs, glitches, performance fixes, one last pass through audio, 12 to 15 hour days. This is gaming, hard work, lunch, dinner, working. You do it because you love it. And I would say if you're in a position of being, a shareholder in a company, right? Or maybe you have significant ownership in a project's revenue, I can understand the whole, you know what, right? This is a ship. We gotta run the ship. We gotta do this thing. We're a band of pirates off on a quest. But it can be, pretty different when this is just the way an entire game ends up being developed. And that's because crunch often does lead to a lot of problems, and it also leads to technical debt. We need only look at Cyberpunk 2077, a game that thankfully has illustrated a lot of the issues that crunch culture really produces to quite a lot of the gaming public, right? So we can understand maybe mistakes are a bit more likely if people are, they've just been going hard for a long, long, long time. And that can especially be troublesome. I mean, in every area, but if that's like your core system engineers and stuff, I mean, you need those people to be performing well, right? Like with engineers, you really don't want to fix problems with sheer throwing more man hours at the issue. Instead you want a smaller amount of smart work. But of course, we don't live in an ideal world. We can't always have that. And ultimately, that's why crunch ends up happening. It's not really something that I think too often happens because of, real bad, taskmaster with a whip just being cruel. It usually just happens because planning was overly optimistic and now the whole thing's fallen to pieces. But the company needs to hit, this thing. We need to hit this milestone in order to get our, unlock our next gate of funding from our publisher. So, fuck it. I guess we have to do an all-nighter. This is something that every indie developer will know of. And it does happen at a larger scale at a company like this. I think you then combine that with a little bit of COVID and some of those earlier days and the sort of forced remote from home that would have happened there, and we can start to understand some of these issues. Now, to this tweet, Schofield did apologize. He was basically saying, look, I'm only trying to, praise the passion of the team. I'm not trying to be super pro crunch culture or anything. I'm just saying, holy shit, this is gaming. Look, everyone is showing up and putting in their best. So it's the sort of thing where if this sentiment is expressed internally to a bunch of people who are on the same page as him, who see him as a leader, putting in as many hours or more hours than they are, then it will be better received. But if that sentiment gets out to be consumed by the public, then it does take on a different tone, a different form of scrutiny. Yeah. It is basically, it is what it is. Now, he did say that overall he's taking personal responsibility for the launch. That's basically that. He's done that. Mistakes happen. We can think about why. Overall, though, it's not just the performance that's an issue. We are seeing plenty of outlets, including ones that tested with the PlayStation 5 and therefore got a really good experience just talking about issues with the game. So overall, it's getting a 76 critic average. That honestly is not that bad. And I think it does mean that if the game is well aligned with your own sensibilities and preferences, then you're going to have a good time. As an example, if you would basically just like to, I don't know, smoke a joint and be creeped out, it's probably going to be fine. If this is the aesthetic that's super up your alley, probably going to be fine. If you're maybe looking for some things in the game mechanics level, the exploration level, things like that, well, you're not really going to get those as much. And that's what we really get when we go through into the reviews. And Connor and our team, he went through everything for this whole story in a hell of a lot of detail. This morning, I took a look at a whole bunch more of the Steam reviews to try and understand a little bit more. This is one of those games that's on my, Christmas time off list. I'm sure you have one as well. But overall, right, the game looks beautiful. The photoreal stuff is pretty incredible. For the combat, some people really, really like it, with its dodging and its resource management. Other people find it to be kind of aggravating. I've seen some version of Devil May Space or something like that be applied to some of the melee because of the funny maneuvers that people can do. I've seen that be applied both in a positive and negative way, so who knows. It's a combat system. Some will love it, some will not. There are some other issues then. Linearity. It is a humongously linear game. To some people, that's a big issue. Honestly, to me, that's not always a big issue, actually. Sometimes I kind of just want a romp, and I'm fine with a linear game. But again, it comes down to personal preference. There's then people basically saying, where's the new thing? What's it doing? This is Dead Space again. And to some people, that'll be a large problem. To other people, it's an entry in a genre that they're really happy to get, and it's something that they like, and they don't particularly want it to try and reinvent the wheel. Which, to be honest, is kind of a camp that I personally would fall into. To get some of the more choice quotes: decent combat, unsettling environments, masterful light and audio design, effective voice acting, stands utterly on its own merits. It excels at what it sets out to do, which is deliver a rollickingly good ride with plenty of scares along the way, and takes clear pride in its heritage. Pride in its heritage. To some people, that's great. To other people, it's a lack of innovation. Turns out we're all individuals. It looks like Dead Space, sounds like Dead Space, and mostly plays like Dead Space. Okay, well, the other side of things, one crucial difference is the ways the Callisto Protocol feels modern make it worse. You can rarely deviate from the precise corridor you need to navigate, and if you do, you'll find a helpful item or an audio log, and then immediately turn around and head back to the critical path. An amalgam, less than the sum of its parts, whose main focus becomes overwrought and frustrating by the time you're halfway through its short runtime. Skill Up, that was a really good review, also pretty scathing one. As he himself said, it's just a review, it's just an opinion. Oppressively linear, terrible combat that excels only in frustrating you, and woeful PC performance is an easy skip. So essentially, just about everybody agrees on what the game is, how effective it is at being that. That then is where we get the point of differentiation. As for the performance issues, those are obviously an issue, but I do tend to find that a lot of reviewers don't really take those things massively into account. I think they're generally trying to write from the perspective of this game's performance, this game's review of the game over time as just a piece of games art, which can have its pros and its cons. The whole thing about reviewers and performance, hey, that's been talked about to death. What are you reviewing? The game as a piece of art? The game and the software? Just the software? There's a lot to talk about there, but it's not really something for today. So it's a big enough game. A lot of this just comes down to people's tastes. To a lot of people, this game is a rebuke of EA's bullshittery with Dead Space 3. It's making this new IP. We know that there's going to be 2 more gameplay modes, and then, of course, a piece of narrative DLC as well. All that's really good stuff. So what are the issues then? The linearity. I've seen plenty of talk about grindiness in the combat, enemy variety issues. Another one was, as an example, a mini-boss being reused quite a bit towards the end of the game. And ultimately, where I'm left when I think about this, somewhere pretty clear. So number one with this game, we've had a rush to the finish. Now, the thing is, right, you don't sit down, plan a game, make the game, and then how good that game is depends on your plan. I know that might sound kind of shocking, but it is like that. Game design is not a precise science. It is an art. And that is something that's extremely important. You know the way a chef will taste the sauce or do things like that and tweak things as it goes on? A little bit of that does happen in games. And I have to wonder if a number of things with this game's development have kind of just had issues, right? That's really what I get the sense of, especially on the front of playtesting. It seems that this game did, in a way, come together towards the finish. And that very often is the case. But the thing is, from the point where you can play your game from start to finish, that is not the end of game development. That is where you start honing and refining. You know, whenever people talk about polish, it's more than just bugs. It's balance. It's how many enemies are respawning at this particular corridor. When we playtest the game, does this enemy type feel too samey? Is this combat play space really working for us? Would we need to redesign that? A whole bunch of things that are, you know, not things you can talk about in a spec sheet. They're just little things that as a player you feel second to second as you play through the whole game. I mean, a good example, if this was happening in like 2 weeks' time, I'd actually be able to say so much more to you about the development of our game. But suffice to say, I mean, things where, you know, we've been able to play the game from start to finish for a decent while now. And it's actually really good that we've had the time that we've had. It was in a really strong position, and it's, for us, the Pale Beyond is only getting in a more and more strong position as we've been able to playtest. We've been doing external playtesting with one company. We've been doing another one with some of our community, with people outside of our community as well. We've literally been doing like weekly playtests, whole bunch of this, as we try to refine the game, work out, you know, what are all the little bits where people are having problems? Where are the bits that just, you know, break somebody out of the flow? And to me, it feels like this is a game that perhaps didn't get all the playtesting that it could have needed. Because you see a lot of these issues with, say, you know, linearity. Yeah, I mean, people could report those issues. In principle, it would not take you an inconceivably crazy amount of time to try to address that with a little bit more in the way of, a little bit more in the way of exploration or people's problems with the enemy grindiness. Well, you probably can't just make new enemies towards the end of the game, absolutely, but there are some little things you could do. Basically, there's lots of little bits of refining. Right, you know, imagine a great statue, you know, carved or, you know, chipped out of marble. And it's just at that bit where it's rough and it needs a lot more, you know, honing and polishing just to get the form just right. That is where playtesting is one of the most important things. And if you look at a game that seems to have had pretty much everything go right for it in terms of its development process, you would look at something like Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, right? Because with that game, I think it's fair to say that it is a utter 10 out of 10 in terms of executing on its own vision. And that means, you know, the game maybe is an 8 out of 10 for a reviewer, right? But you can't really deny that, oh yeah, it, you know, runs pretty well. I know it had some issues around launch, but as an incarnation of what that overall game is, you know, you couldn't really imagine that 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 months would radically change it. Whereas I think with a lot of these games that come out and they end up being, you know, a 70-something, that is really when a few months can make all the difference. And I think it's 505 Games. I think it's the people that do the Friday the 13th game that really popped off. And one of them said that, you know, initially they were thinking they'd really be around the 70s on their Metacritic. And then they delayed things. They spent a few months polishing. And whatever the release is, it was a lot better than what it would have been. And they really just imparted the importance of that particular period of time that they spent. Another thing I would say is this is a new studio. It's one that was pretty much a year old whenever COVID happened, which will have forced a lot of people remote. And here's the thing with remote work. There are pros and there are cons. A lot of the time people treat, if you have criticisms of working from home, then you are obviously an evil capitalist pig who wants to enslave your employees, which is, you know, pretty ridiculous. And I don't think that this is a straw man. I mean, we've seen all of the big articles coming out, you know, oh, the office is dead. I think for a lot of procedural work from home is pretty damn good. In the same way you look at a lot of those, I won't get into this, like, running a business nerdy shit, but there are some core bits of creative work that do just work quite a lot better in person. And imagine this, right? Everyone's just going and doing their thing in their own little corner. You don't have as much of the, those little sparks that just happen when you look someone in the eyes, not through Zoom, but in real life, and real creativity, like the jazz starts to happen. That's where a lot of real greatness, I think, does come about. And I think you do need some of that in your company, obviously in a way that is respecting the wishes of your employees and that does offer people flexibility. I totally believe in that. I just think work from home, it has pros. Work in the office, it has pros. They both have pros. They also both have cons, as most things do. Nothing's black or white. I just have to wonder if a lot of these problems, when it comes down to playtesting, remote development, few little aspects of the creativity, I just have to wonder if those, played against the company. Maybe a period of time where they didn't have to face all of those external issues, maybe things would have came out a little bit better. I mean, yes, this is being run by industry veterans, but industry veterans that worked in they are veterans in an industry that's been getting pretty different as times went on. Now, evidently, if you just look at that game, they obviously have an excellent team, but I think nobody can deny that this thing could have used a little bit more time, right? A little bit of a delay. And then what I think of is Krafton. Krafton's, big publicly traded company. As we saw, their stock, as pointed out by Sir Cantoto, there you go. Their stock dropped. Could this not have been delayed into Q1 of next year? Or maybe Q2 of next year? I mean, yeah, you'd have to defer that revenue. But from all social media, from its velocity in Steam, all of that, you can tell that this game is so set up to be a hit. Why not give them the time? To make it just right. I mean, yeah, it'll cost money, but Krafton could definitely pay that bill. I think it's a shame that the best version of their vision did not really come through. There's even things like some of the criticisms of, story plotting, things like that. You'd be amazed what pickup shots can do, I know there's a lot of movies that kind of get chopped to pieces and destroyed by a studio, but still, sometimes you may need to do some pickups, and maybe a few months would afford that time. Because sometimes all that it really takes is amending a few scenes based on start to finish playtesting of a game to really make some elements hit far more, powerfully. So overall, that's the situation with this game. We'll have to wait and see how things go. We do, of course, have the season pass with a contingent bundle. I will note, a lot of people came onto our video being under the impression that we had been doing stuff based on IGN. So the deal is IGN had some pretty sloppy headlining in their article. We, of course, didn't actually use IGN in any of our reporting. We were VGC. Funny enough, VGC are the people that IGN originally sourced. But more importantly, the thing that I was literally reading was, number one, Glenn Schofield's tweet, which people seemingly thought we didn't read, even though it was in the video, and the Steam page, their own Steam page, and how their Steam page framed the animations, which was in a way that I thought was pretty funky and not really a precedent that I would like to set going forward. And again, as I came to with that one, it ultimately is an issue of bad optics, because I don't think they're really doing anything wrong. It's literally just bad optics, and I don't really like the idea of, say, Ubisoft seeing this and thinking, hang on a second, Overwatch and Valorant, those multiplayer free-to-play games, they're getting, cosmetic animations. What's this over here? Their season pass says that a bundle has a mode and also has a skin pack and 13 new animations? Hang on. Players will... Oh. Okay. Imagine if we could go back and sell more Cassandra animations so you could have more varied combat or something like that, Yeah, it's a thing of optics, to be sure, and I think overall optics has been the issue here. Yeah, it's a shame that they did not get the time that they needed. I still do intend to play the game. As I originally said, I'll be doing it over Christmas. I really would have liked this to have been a clear win, to be honest, because I love science fiction, I love horror, like more really good sci-fi horror content. I mean, goddamn, the likes of The Thing. And I know that people shit in Event Horizon. I really like Event Horizon. Spoilers, just think of it as a prequel to Warhammer 40k and Spawn on. But hey, it is what it is. Let's hope that the story DLC is able to build on what they've got and have a more satisfying narrative conclusion for people, and that the modes can further, hone in that combat and really make it shine. So that's it for today's video. That's the situation with the Callisto Protocol. I'd say if you could try it out at a friend's house, that would be ideal. It's hard to straight up recommend unless you are a dead straight fan of the genre, which is why I personally am buying it. But I wouldn't necessarily give it a, from everything that I've read, I would say, proceed with caution unless you're somebody like me, and this is specifically up your wheelhouse. So that's that. Let's hope they turn around and, make good in this situation, and that we do have a brilliant science fiction horror IP to look forward to for years to come. Okay, that's it for today's video. Next, man, want to learn some stuff about Diablo? Hit up this video and hit up the other video about NVIDIA, because oh boy, it is heating up in GPU land.